Welcome. You're tuned in to the We Are All Artists podcast, a space where we talk about living life as a conscious creative. I'm your host, Adriana Douglas. Our intention is to support you throughout the process of discovering your inner artist and transforming from the inside out. Here in this space, we believe that the way out is through. On the other side is a world with more art, more beauty, and access to more of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. And now let's begin. Hello, everyone. Happy January. It snowed yesterday, which makes it feel like winter over here, and I'm really happy about that. So, cozying up by the fire to bring you today's episode. I am really excited to share the guest that I had on the show today, Kendra Cunov, founder of The Collective and the Fierce Grace Incubator. Kendra has been studying, facilitating, and most importantly, practicing authentic relating, embodiment practices, and deep intimacy work for over 20 years. Kendra has worked with thousands of men, women, and couples in the areas of embodiment, intimacy, communication, and full self-expression. She co-founded Authentic World, as well as the Embodied Relationship and Intimacy Training Salon, and pioneered some of the most cutting-edge relation work on the planet. She works with organizations and leaders, as well as men, women, and couples who know that presence, truth, connection, and integrity are our truest access points to success in business and in love. I just finished up Kendra's free completion and creation 2-part class series on completing 2023 and setting your intentions for 2024. This is my second year participating in Kendra's class, and it has been such a game changer to take this space around the new year and allow for ideas to emerge from that stillness. I am not quite ready to jump into taking action yet on 2024, and I so appreciate that this class has been made available in order to really get clear on what we desire to create before jumping right into creation mode. In today's episode, we completely flow on the topics of relational resets, the no-man diet, cultivating safety, and what titration means, discussing the energetic range and how we're here to be more human, and really just this idea that the practice becomes the access point in whatever way you have a practice in your life. And finally, how to stay with fulfillment, and also what happens if you allow fulfillment. What does that mean? I'm so excited for you all to flow with us and can't wait to hear your feedback on this episode. Good morning, Kendra. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you here. I've been following your work for, I feel like at least a year, a little bit over a year now. And I've been so inspired by the way that you approach relationships and the way that you approach sharing your story in general. I've found it to be really full of integrity and honesty, and to the point that it has made me feel like I understand better just how to human. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'd love to start out chatting with you really about how I found your work, which was it through relational resets, and what that might mean to an audience member listening, whether they're in a relationship or not, at this time, what it might look like for them to take a step back and assess relationships in their life.
Yeah. So, the program I have is the No Man Diet. I also have a class I taught that's called the Relational Reset, which is just free and anyone can watch it. It's probably 90 minutes. And so obviously it doesn't lead through the entire process, but it gives just some guideposts along the way. And um, and both of those, I mean, it's interesting when you were talking, when you said relationships, my mind sort of went like, oh, like any relationship, because sometimes we do need these pauses in friendship
Yeah.
but it's different. And so both the relational reset and the no man diet are geared more towards romantic, sexual, intimate relationship. And, the two things that I am asked about most often are what would this program be like for women who are in relationships they don't want to leave,
Yeah.
that they're basically happy in,
Yeah.
and then what would this look like for men? And so again, it's like every year I'm like, do I have time to create a new program? Am I gonna create the one for women in relationships? Am I gonna create the
Right.
one for men? Like, anyway, it hasn't happened yet in the
Yeah.
last like 6 years. But those are the two places I get drawn most, because there is something so valuable about this kind of pause. And so I am going to speak most right now, I would say people, but I would say women, right,
Yeah.
who are in, again, it can be like, you're dissatisfied. You're sort of chronically dating. You're either, actually dissatisfied in your relationship or sort of dissatisfied with chronically dating, never seeming to meet the right kind of person, on and off, a lot of serial monogamy. I mean, a lot of the women who come into the no man diet, actually, what they realize is they haven't been single in like 20 years, or since they were 15 or, whatever that is. So it can be, and then sometimes there's women who've been, single for a long time. Sometimes women will feel like they've been single for a long time and then realize they've never really been single, but it's that they haven't really had that kind of intimacy they want to have. And what I find about that kind of container is it's like, it's not, obviously it's not that dating, sex, relationship, men, whatever you want to call it, that like that there's anything bad or wrong about that, or that we, want to stop that for the rest of our lives. But sometimes when we're in places where there's like compulsive or habitual behavior or relational dynamics that have just become so entrenched, either within ourselves or between two or more people, stepping outside of the system completely and pausing can help us see what's actually happening and actually reset habitual patterns. Like, so often we're like, well, can't I just change it? Like, while I like can't I, change whatever this habit is I have with eating while I'm eating, ice cream in bed? Like, what can I do it at the same time? And it's not that we can't, right? Obviously, sometimes we are still in relationships we want to stay in, and there's work to be done there. But sometimes it's also like, you know what? I'm going to step outside this for a specific period of time so that I can get a little bit more perspective about what's actually happening inside myself.
I love that you mentioned the reset of the patterns and the pause, because that's where the transformation can happen. That's where you're able to finally catch something and create a new behavior. And I would say, from what you mentioned, I probably leaned toward more serial monogamy, where it was like, oh my gosh, who am I without a relationship, without a
Yes.
partner, without that person to kind of lean on. And I found that one of the things that I learned was, where am I using a relationship as sort of like a way to not maybe step into the things I wanted to do, or
Yeah.
the purpose or the creation, right? Like creativity, creating this podcast, creating, designing my life intentionally. I feel like relationships were a place where I sort of hung out comfortably and
Mm-hmm.
allowed that to kind of be the thing or the reason that other things didn't happen. So that was one of the big takeaways I had from my relational reset. And I would say that it helped tremendously to understand just how you show up in any relationship as well. Because once you're not in partnership, and I've been learning this a lot from the Gene Keys, if you're familiar with the Gene Keys, the Venus sequence, like it talks about if you're not currently in partnership, that all of a sudden all the other relationships become the relationships that you're working on through this Venus sequence. And so I found it fascinating to see even how I relate to others when not in a relationship. I don't know if you could speak to that, but it's been interesting just seeing how we relate in general with
I mean, what I love about what you said, and I find so common, is that often, this discovery of, oh, who am I not in relationship? And often there's a lot of fear. First of all, we just don't even look at that, because it's like a hidden fear in the background. And then the possibility of a reset comes up, and it's like, no, that would be too scary. And then there's this discovery. And so often, the most common comment I get from women in the no man diet is like, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with men at all. I'm like, I know. But if I told you that at the beginning, you might not join. But that discovery of, oh, this is what I want to do. And what I love about it is, I found this in my own life with my own relational reset. And then I see it so often, which is then, post reset or no man diet or cleanse, beginning to date or getting into relationship, we will actually see ourselves start to play out some of our old patterns. And we're so much more aware. Like we'll go like, oh, I remember so clearly seeing, I was like, oh, this is that thing that I do. Oh, no. Actually, if that's like, if I can't be in this dynamic without doing this, it's not worth it. So either I'm going to actually change that, which it often feels like risking the relationship, but it's sort of worth it at that point. When you see what's on the other side, you start to realize like, that is worth it. There is no relationship. And it's not even like a big dramatic. It's just like, oh, no, I'm going to show up this way that I found in myself during the reset. And if this isn't the right person to be with me like that, that is okay. Like I am so okay with that. So, yeah.
Maybe with that, we could talk a little bit about the resisting the ending. Because I would say too, it's like you just mentioned, you kind of see the pattern, you catch it, and you're like, it's not worth it. But I know at least for me, and I'm sure maybe others could relate, it's like in the back of your mind, you're like, but is it worth it? Like, do I resist this cycle? Or you really could almost complete the pattern or complete the cycle in a way after you've been aware of it. And you're like, I'm not going there again.
Yeah.
And how we try to find all the ways to not let something end.
Well, I want to speak to that in two ways.
Okay.
So one is that I would say, so for me, what I saw with who is now my partner, and we had been in partnership before too. So it was like we were re-entering something, and I was like, oh, look, that's what we did before. And that's what we're doing now. And it wasn't like, oh, so I'm ending the relationship. What I was really aware of was my own part in that pattern, and how easy it was to say he's doing this thing. But I was like, oh, but I now refuse, right? I've had time to see, and I can see clearly how I am participating. And I just did me differently, if you will.
Yeah.
Like literally, it wasn't even a conversation. Again, I think there's really important relational conversations to have about dynamics. And a lot of times there's an internal piece that's like, and what if, even without a conversation and some sort of agreement that it's okay, what if I just go like, oh, this is how I'm going to be? Like a small example with my partner was the ways in which I would sort of withhold affection because I thought it made him uncomfortable. Like I'm more effusive. He's a little bit more reserved, I'm more like, and then I had gotten into a pattern of like, oh, I guess we don't do that because that's not how he wants it. And then I was like, oh, but this is how I'm going to be in relationship. And if that doesn't work, that's totally cool. But I'm going to, and it wasn't like, hey, can we have a conversation about what's okay and what's not? And, I'm more effusive and you're not, and let's negotiate this. I was just like, I'm going to be the kind of emotionally affectionate, effusive person I am. And I trust, I'm not going to cross his boundaries and violate him, but I also trust that actually, if that doesn't work, he'll let me know. And then we can discover where we go. And it totally changed our dynamic. And things that I just thought weren't going to be welcome actually became welcome when I brought them without assuming they weren't okay. So that's slightly different than what you're talking about,
Yeah.
resisting the ending. So
Right.
I just want to give people both, I think that speaks to both, if you have had some kind of reset and then you see the pattern, or
Yeah.
even if you're in a long-term relationship. I'm trying to remember, I think I have a piece that I wrote it's about shifting dynamics in long-term relationships. And that often it can take, and it really, I mean, I want to say it's hugely brave and courageous, right? Like it really feels like a risk because it is changing a dynamic, but it doesn't necessarily mean the end.
I love
So
that.
the courage to show up the way you want to show up, even if it's outside the habit that you have in your long-term relationship.
It feels so cool to hear you share that, because it also is in a way teaching us. There's this dance of like when to bring something up and when to not. And you're saying you're holding both. You're saying have the conversations when the conversations are necessary or required or would benefit, but also like sometimes the change is just within us and shifting a little bit to
Mhm.
to change the experience versus having to have this conversation about the affection or about like that would just maybe not create the shift. Like the shift is in the embodiment.
It totally is. And I think that's it's really one of the challenges because it really is a both and, I mean, of
Right.
course there are conversations to be had. So I always want to make sure that that's
Yeah.
clear. But I do think that kind of current culture, at least in kind of the personal growth embodiment, therapeutic realm, we've gotten really caught in this dynamic of like talking things out.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like the map is not the territory, right? Like the words are not the actual experience. And what I have discovered for myself, and a lot, I talk to women about this. I think that it probably is also true for men, but that a lot of times we're actually we're trying to create like a sense of safety, of saying, "I want to do this. Will you tell me it's okay?" So that I feel safe before I do it. Right? I want to tell you I love you. I want to run up and hug you when I see you. Will you tell me ahead of time that that's going to be okay so that it doesn't feel like a risk to do it, rather than, you know what? It is a risk. And actually some people aren't going to want my affection. And am I willing to risk that? Like partly it's out of love for myself. Just
Yeah.
I love that I am this way enough that it's okay with me if I run up to hug you and someone doesn't want to be hugged. And also, I love enough that I'm going to bring my love the way that I love and risk that some people don't want it.
And that feeling that you mentioned of risk, that's so important. I think we forget sometimes like that a risk can feel scary, but it can also be really liberating
Yes.
to the
Yes.
to the
Yes.
human experience. And
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think it's so complex and multi-layered because I think there is a certain realm of safety. We need like a certain amount of safety to grow, but then there can also be this level of like, no, I have to feel so safe. I have to know I'm never going to be rejected. I have to make sure that everything's okay. No one's ever going to say anything hurtful. And I think we all individually need to find the places we feel safe enough to do the thing that actually feels like risk, because risk itself will never actually feel safe.
Mhm.
That's baked into it. And so to be discerning, is this the person that I feel safe enough with? Is this the relationship I feel safe enough? Do I feel safe enough inside myself? Right? Do I feel resourced enough? Do I have other external resources that make me feel safe enough to take a risk? And yes, to be discerning around that, and then to go like, all right, fuck it.
Literally.
It's worth a risk.
Yeah. I wonder how we could talk about safety at many different layers or levels, but I wonder how maybe if there's some practical tips or embodiment practices of cultivating that safety to kind of get to this space of like, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to do it anyway. like,
Yeah.
or the spaces that might feel nourishing to folks to actually replenish, whether it's in nature, whether it's in community, to actually cultivate this safety?
Yeah, I mean, for me, nature is a really big one.
Yeah.
And I think it's tricky. Like, not everybody has necessarily grown up or had that feel safe in their lives or feels really connected to that. Ultimately, I do think that that is like our innate state is to co-regulate with nature.
Yeah.
But we might need to titrate that depending
Yeah.
on what, again, has felt safe in our
Totally.
lives. So finding that, I do think though, and again, I think there is like titrating is probably a really important piece here.
Yeah.
Because I do think that some of it does have to do with spending time with ourselves. And that we actually find that's part of how we find that we're safe within ourselves is kind of that sense. I mean, you didn't say this outright, but there's almost a way that that's what I heard you speaking to is like, oh, I stay in relationship because there's a little bit, it feels unsafe to be on my own. Like I don't quite know. And it's really the unknown. It's not even that we would have a direct thought, being with me is scary. We just be like, being with me is unknown. Therefore, it might be scary. Right.
Totally.
And, and that can be intimate relationship. That can be all kinds of things. But I think even today, it so often is like not going for a walk without listening to a podcast.
It's so true.
And so again, it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but it creates an experience, like an unconscious experience in ourselves that it becomes that to be alone with ourselves is unknown and therefore feels unsafe. So I would recommend to people like titrate, go for like a short walk without your phone, without a podcast, without a friend, just like be with your own thoughts and the sounds around you. And again, that might be, there might be human sounds around you, or you might find like a bike path within the city, right? Where there's a little bit of birds, it's a little bit quieter. And it's like, oh, this actually, I'm okay with just me. And we start to realize that we're safer than we thought we were. I mean, again, it really depends on where people are at, but you're talking about how do we create safety? I mean, I think it's important to recognize that we probably do have habit responses that sometimes make us feel unsafe when we are safe. But at the same time, I do really encourage people like to trust their own body. And so if your body, I mean, this is one of the interesting things is that I will work with people who will say, when this happens, my breath gets tight and I tighten my body and I'd like to learn how to relax in that circumstance. And my first response will often be, well, let's listen, like your body is actually asking you for something. So for instance, when we all know it's sort of better to breathe long and deep now, but that holding of the breath is information. There's actually, our body is saying like, oh, I'm not sure. Maybe I need something. Maybe I need, some assurance rather than overriding that and just being like, no, breathe long and deep and then you'll feel safer. It's like, okay, well, can I, and this is it can happen in nature, I think a lot, but it can happen wherever you are, which is sometimes, when we have an automatic, not safe response, is that it can be helpful to pause and look around, right? Where am I? What can I actually see? What's actually happening around me? And it's not to try to convince ourselves like I feel unsafe, but I'm going to convince myself I'm safe. But it's letting our senses come in contact with reality around us and go, what is actually happening right now? And is it safe or unsafe?
I relate to that so much. And especially two things. One, the comment you made about titrating, I think that was underrated for me completely. Like in the beginning of really a, relational reset or healing journey, I found myself wanting to achieve,
Yeah.
grow and go too fast. And
Yeah.
what happened was like I had to slow down. Like my body was like, we can't go that fast in this arena. And also, to your point about being on your own, for me, it was this journey about like being able to expand my capacity and my range of like being able to feel. So the
Yeah.
example you used about the walk was perfect. And that was something I found myself doing. I'm like, can I actually go for a walk and just like do nothing? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to be entertained. I can just be entertained by nature. And that was difficult. And
Yes.
it's like something that you think is so silly when you're like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I could go for a walk with, but in this day and age with like um technology and our attention being pulled in a million different directions, the slowing down felt really, really important to even be able to be open to this discussion about safety, if that makes sense. Like,
Yes.
um,
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I probably your listeners, understand titration, but I want to like the example
yeah,
that I
please.
often give, and I don't know if everyone did this in school. I think I was in 5th grade, and we would get a penny,
Okay.
and then we had like a cup of water and then a water dropper.
Okay.
And the experiment was if you fill up the dropper of water and you just put the whole thing on top of the penny, it all goes right off. But if you take the water dropper completely full again, and one drop at a time, you drop it on top of the penny or the coin, it builds that tension point over the water, and you can put the entire dropper of water on the penny, one drop at a time, in a way that you could not do if you just put it
Mm,
all on at the same time.
okay.
And so titrating being understanding at what speed and amount, and you used this word earlier, can I digest what I am offering myself? And even if it's all superfoods and like nutrient
Yeah.
dense, like
Sometimes it's
actually,
a lot.
I still need one bite at a time, and I still need to chew it before I swallow it. And sometimes I need to like take a break from eating altogether. And that I think, when we're talking about personal growth, that can look like, yeah, doing things that aren't growth, or that aren't always, deep introspection, or like feel your feelings 24/7 all the time and go to the deepest depth. It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, sometimes we just need to breathe, and we just need to look at the clouds, and we just need to have a conversation about, light things like,
Yeah.
yeah,
That that has been a big lesson, as
yeah,
it has been like you can live the teachings. I found myself constantly in the theory
yes,
and being a little bit, again, we talk about afraid to put the theory into practice and just live without holding on to the teachings and the learning so much. So I
yeah.
definitely I definitely have appreciated just the relational reset piece in general, because a lot of that is putting it into practice. It's not just learning, it's actually real time in your real life, in your current reality, like uh, experiencing versus, virtual or more programs to learn more. And so that's been something that is definitely, for anyone that hasn't experienced a reset, or anybody that is, maybe to kind of close the topic a little bit about relational resets, if anybody is sort of on the fence about one, I'm sure there are people that come to you wanting to do it but either aren't ready or right, are scared of the uncertainty, or just not sure. Are there kind of any words of wisdom that you pass along in terms of when this would be the right thing for somebody, and how they could make the decision or
Mhm.
the discernment?
Um, I mean, it's one of those tricky things. And this is what I say to people when they reach out, is that I just say, I trust you.
Yeah.
So I think it's always important for people to feel like they get to make their own decision in their own time. I will say that to the best of my knowledge, I mean, I've never had anybody come back and tell me that they have regretted doing the no man diet or doing never like, oh man, I really shouldn't have done that. But I have had actually, there have been many times where I've had somebody reach out to me 1 year with interest, not sign up. And then I only teach the program once a year. And so then the next year they reach out again and they're like, oh, I wish I had done it last year.
Yeah. Right.
What I do want to say about it's really about relational reset, or it's really about anything, is that I always, it's like, while that's true, while I've had people say, I wish I had done it last year, because here I am again, a year later, wanting to do the same thing. What I think is important about our lives is that actually we have the opportunity in every moment. And so any moment, and again, it's not even about a relational reset. It's just like the moment we get to choose, oh, I didn't want to spend time with myself all last week, but like right now I can. And I don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about how I avoided myself all last week. I can just do it right now. I didn't have that conversation with that person that I knew I really should have had a month ago. Okay, great. But you know what? I can have it right now. I did, like whatever it is, we can pick it up right now.
It's so true. And it speaks to our ability to, as you're saying right now, be in the present and repair. It almost sounds a little bit like
Mhm.
repair, right?
Yeah.
In a way you can repair or um readjust, and you don't have to go into patterns of blame or of guilt or
Mhm.
of shame for not doing the thing in the exact moment that you thought it should happen or expected, or in the way that you thought something was supposed to go down. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. And I'm curious if we could go into, we've talked a little bit about safety and capacity. So maybe we could talk about our energetic range and how we can sort of get attached to one way of being or another. And I'm curious if this could relate to the dance of masculine and feminine at all, or if we table that for a second and go into that a little later.
Well, I'd say that's one of the realms,
Yeah.
if we're going to talk about energetic range. I mean, that's just it's one of the polarities in the universe, if you
Yeah.
will.
Right.
And so I think, there's just ways to touch on that in that realm. In the broadest sense, and this is actually, I was talking to you about the class series,
Yeah.
Embodied Wholeness, like in a big way, that's the inspiration for that class series.
Okay.
It has to do with this idea that I mean, and on that, I even specifically said, like, we're not necessarily here to be more masculine or more
Right.
feminine. We're here to be more human.
Which is a great discussion, because I think we've kind of skewed like, oh, if I'm missing masculine, I need to go take
Yeah.
feminine. Oh, like it's become a little bit of a discussion on kind of what I feel like what you're lacking or what you're missing to go
Yeah.
get the other side.
And again, that can be
Yeah.
like, that can be an access point,
Yes.
right? We
Yeah.
go like, oh, my range is limited here.
Yeah.
Well, let me expand, right? That can be an
Yeah.
access point. But to me, I think it's really important to always come back to like, but the purpose is so that we become more fully human.
Hmm.
And and so I do think, I mean, whatever you believe about karma and what you just come into the world with, and then the process of your conception and your birth, and then the
Right.
family you were raised in, and then the culture you grew up in, and then your first relationships, and like all this
All of
stuff, and
that.
then the culture that we live in now, and then, I mean, who even knows, right? That there's all kinds of things coming externally that say you should be like this, you shouldn't be like this. And then there's just our own selves
Yeah.
that have ideas about who we are and who we're not. And over time, it is true that a lot of us find like, oh, we have these very narrow range. And some of it we feel really obvious, that just feels like, well, the culture says I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be da 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 da. What
Yes.
we're often a little bit less aware of, what can be a little bit more subtle, are the places where I go like, well, I'm just not that kind of person. And where that's kind of an internal limitation. And it can happen in all kinds of ways. I mean, you even hear it, people will be like, well, I'm a really great coach, but I'm just not good at putting myself out there. I'm just not the kind of person that can market themselves. And it's kind of like, okay, I mean, that's fine. And that's a place of energetic range. The willingness, again, even what we talked about at the beginning around risk, right? The willingness, the risk to be seen. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It's not like, oh, if you're going to be seen, you have to do it this particular way, but oh, what is it to let go, not only of things that we think might be unacceptable culturally. My father told me, my mother told me, the city I live in, it's only okay to do da 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 da, or whatever. But also to start to relax around, I am this kind of person, or I'm not this kind of person. For me, for instance, it's like, well, I'm like not the kind of person who wears red lipstick or so, it'd be things like that. And it's like, why not? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think some of them can be kind of larger
Okay.
things. And then, like you were saying, that the practice being the access point, sometimes these things that seem so tiny actually touch on things that are so much deeper. Like, I gave myself a practice actually at one point to wear lipstick every day for 30 days. And it was so hard.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, who cares, and it doesn't even really matter and stuff. But it brought up stuff about who what I look like, and am I good at it? And am I feminine enough? And will my, it just brought up that was like, again, kind of on the surface, but actually it was like deep grief. And through this seemingly maybe silly practice of wearing lipstick every day for 30 days.
I have another one for you. I've been really into clothes this year, but similar to your lipstick example, it's brought up so many things to get, can I wear that? Is that color okay? Is that texture? Like, there's been so many mental gymnastics that have been happening just about something as simple as getting dressed for the day. So I so relate to these almost like these unassuming practices that actually become a lot more like medicine than maybe even like sometimes, doing worksheets of thinking about your origin story, right? Like sometimes it's in the red lipstick that you find the answer, and not necessarily in like more journaling, although journaling's fabulous. Just
right. Again, but I do think that there is that point. And again, sometimes we can understand, somebody can be like, I understand that this happened and my mother said this, and then this happened. And this is why and never quite move through it, rather than like, oh my God, I'm literally putting on the lipstick and now I'm going to walk out the door. And like in the process of now walking down the street, I am addressing this thing that I know, but I can't quite resolve.
Right.
Unless I bring it, I would say through my body, right? Unless I actually have some action, movement, gesture, expression. Because this is, while we may be more than our bodies, right? We're born into these bodies. We're born and we move through the world as these bodies. And so I think there is that, just you sparked this with range, right? Energetic range. And what I find not always so helpful about masculine, feminine is that those are really large, like energetic concepts.
Right.
And so if I just, I have women all the time come and say, I want to be more feminine. I'm like, okay, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Does that mean wearing lipstick? Does that mean wearing a dress? Does that mean softening the front of your body? Does that mean, what does that mean? And then we can work out, how do we then want to practice range in these areas? But that's so broad. And so for me, I would just say in general, where I really like to, some of it, of course, is just unique, right? When you're working with people individually, then there's that sense of like, oh, this is what is needed to expand range. But as we start to recognize, oh, this is where I think I'm limited externally, this is where I have internal ideas about who I am and who I'm not. But sometimes it's so great to just play, because we don't even always know. We don't know what we don't know. So one of the places that I like to do this is actually in the non-human realm, because we have a lot more ideas about the human realm.
Okay.
But to take on like animal archetypes, or elemental archetypes or things, right? Like, oh, I might be more of like a moon person, and like sun energy is hard. Or no, I'm much more comfortable with like bunny rabbit, and cat of prey is kind of more challenging. And so being in these realms and being like, oh, what is that? If I'm still me and I bring this energy through who I am and how I am feeling, like, how does my body move? And maybe I'm like a very sad large cat of prey, but I still need to hunt so how does that actually move through my body? And we start to find like, oh, this is, maybe this feels better than I thought it would. I was afraid of that part of myself, but actually it feels really good. Or maybe I find that it's really hard to move this part of my body. And oh, I didn't even know that. This wasn't even on my radar of places I thought I needed to expand my energetic range. But like, whoa, my haunches are really not on board with this.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
Mm-hmm.
feel my tail, or I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we can get more playful when we step a little bit outside of the human realm.
That's so interesting. I actually have one of the I was recommended this book by a mentor, The Animal Spirit Guides. And so as you were saying that, I was thinking about the book because literally even if you, and I'll link this in the show notes, but even if you just picked one like dragon, you'll start
Yes.
to read what it means. And then all of a sudden you could, like you were saying, the practice of the playfulness of, oh, do I feel like I embody some of these qualities or not? But it removes that. To me, it's like pressure. I've been thinking about that concept a lot lately. It removes
Yes.
the pressure. And when there's pressure, it feels like then there's no range. There's no freedom of movement. You're like stuck.
Yes. I mean, I think that often that it becomes very, very challenging. You kind of like the pressure from this side this way and the pressure from this side, and then you're like,
Yeah.
like I don't know why I don't feel good.
Yeah.
And you were talking about creativity before, and again, I
Yeah.
think this is actually this play of like where, um, then we start to realize, oh, I have access to all these different possibilities, right? If it's energetic
Yes.
range, it might be different words come out when I'm connected to different parts of energetic range. So we think like, well, what does, embodying a bunny rabbit or like a eagle have anything to do with my intimate relationship? Again, we might find that accessing that eagle energy, actually suddenly different words come through and we realize we can say things differently. Um, or just different ways of moving through the world, or different ways of feeling safe. And then when we feel a little safer, right? Like, oh, when I feel safer, then suddenly I have access to more creativity, or I'm more, more connected to like my desire, what I actually want to do. Or so all these things sort of are, I would say they're just not as linear, as we often want them to be. It'd be so
Right.
nice
I
if they were like,
know.
it'd be so
I
nice if it was like
know.
this and then this and then this and then this and ding.
Yeah. That's how my brain thought this process would go. And it's been surprised every turn and twist that it didn't go that way.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying about the possibilities, because that is something that I've learned so much about as you allow yourself to play in these different areas, whether it's relationships or whether it's in business or somewhere else, things do transfer from one
Yes.
arena to the other. So if you are practicing, an eagle embodiment or characteristics from a bunny and in your healing journey or in your relationship, like those things will carry through to other areas. And when you mention that, I think a lot about just that what the play and the creativity can do, or how it can open up when you allow yourself to explore these unassuming places. Like the creativity for me started to become more apparent when I realized I could choose differently. Like I could choose to embody an eagle. I could choose to do, like, the
Mhm.
choosing, I think, created a lot more freedom and possibility. Like I would say more accountability, if you will, accountability and responsibility to exploring these areas and
Mhm.
really realizing that I had I had the safety, or I had the range, or I had the ability to do this, I think really helped me to go on the creative journey. So I'm curious, maybe we could go more into this idea of play, or this idea of kind of taking on these. It sounds to me it's like more fun embodiment practices. It's not so serious. And I think I've found myself to become super serious sometimes in the healing journey. It's like it has to be all serious and all hard. And I'm sure that there are ways to lighten it up. That's where I'm going.
Absolutely. I think ultimately I think it's incredibly important to find some joy and some lightness and some beauty and some play. I want to touch on something you said that's a little bit, I think it opens the space for this.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
little separate from play, but you were talking about both what I heard was like accountability and responsibility
Yeah.
and choice.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what opened that for you, because I think that is one of the points, right? Where it's like, but how do we get to that? And one of the things that I do want for people is even to have like choice around choice.
Okay.
And it's not quite accurate, but it's close enough, which is starting to recognize, like, again, I think, and maybe this resonates with your experience or not, but that it's like things don't seem like a choice. And then there is this opening where it's like, oh, I could do something differently. But usually it just feels like, well, I can't because
Yes.
I have to do this or else I
Yes.
can't do this because.
Yes.
And so again, like if we're just looking at like what is the access point, sometimes I think just starting to notice what those sentences are is helpful. It opens up like, well, I can't do that because this person will be mad. Oh, okay. And then that's just a little bit more specific than just the looming, I can't do that because something very bad that is definitely gonna happen and
Right.
ruin my life.
Yep. Yep.
And if we go, I can't say this because they'll be mad at me and I'll lose my job. Yes, there's one realm we can start to go, is that true? We can actually question a little bit.
Mhm.
And then even if we go like, well, I don't know that for sure, but it's too scary of a possibility, we start to be able to go, it actually does come. And I want to put this in the realm of positive responsibility. Like it's actually
Yeah.
okay. It is totally okay to say, I'm not willing to say that right now because it's too much of a risk for me to imagine that I could lose my job when I'm supporting two children. Like that is an acceptable choice. And I
Absolutely.
think, again, sometimes people go like, well, if I'm only afraid of them being mad and I don't know if they will, and like, I should be able to risk everything. And it becomes an all or nothing rather than, or we just won't even tell ourselves the truth that the reason I won't say it is because I'm afraid they'll get mad and I might lose my job. So if we can just like name those pieces and then be willing to say I can choose either way. And then there are some things where we go like, oh, I'm afraid this thing, well, I'm trying to think of a different example, but
Yeah.
there's other things where it's like, right. Oh, I don't, I can't run up and hug my boyfriend because he might, reject me, or it might seem like you, and then I'll be like,
Right.
I'm just going to try it. Like I can choose, and then I can choose how to respond to that. So there might be a moment where I'm like, I am willing to risk that. Or I'm willing to wear I can't wear red lipstick because people are going to judge me as a slut, and then I'd be like, okay, first of all, is that true? Like, I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
And they might.
Yeah.
And am I willing, okay, and then am I willing to, that there might be some people who do that and other people who won't. And like, but when we tell the truth about what comes after those, I can't or else, or I have to because then I think that's part of what opens up the breath almost of, oh, is that something I'm willing to risk? Or do I really know that? Or is that just something I've thought for so long? It seems true.
When I hear you say that about the original example about the job,
Yeah.
the thing that I was thinking of for a moment was just that idea of kind of worst case scenario catastrophizing. Like instead of going to this positive responsibility, as you're saying, there's like this default of like worst case scenario, right? Like all the things that could go
Yeah.
wrong. And we don't necessarily think about what could go right. And
Yeah.
also, like you're saying, I've definitely felt in my experience it took a while and a lot of baby shifts before
Yeah.
I even in some arenas saw possibility. Like
Yes.
possibility wasn't available to me in the beginning. I was too wrapped up in safety or risk or what could happen that I couldn't even shift to possibility. And that was also something I think for me, it was like there's so much shame around because you see kind of on the internet or people doing it real good and real correct. And it would drive me crazy because I would like use that as like a to it was like shame based. I would see it and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so ashamed that I am not even in possibility. Like, how could I not be in this state that everybody says is available? So I think there's even a discussion open of like the steps to getting to the positive responsibility.
Yeah. So again, I think sometimes it is just that, like the telling the truth about
Yeah.
what's so. Um, and then I mean, I think there's like multiple things. One is just again more as like a thought experiment in
Yes.
change is to go, oh, so like what is the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And what is the best that could happen? And I mean, I do think like again on
Yes.
the internet, there tends to be like a real polarization.
Yes.
And so there's the people going like best case scenario. And the truth is we don't know at all what's going to happen. Like we don't know the worst is going to happen, but it's not to then suddenly convince ourselves that the best will happen either. It's probably something we haven't even thought of is what's actually
Exactly.
So I think some of it also is just recognizing like, oh, this is like the worst I can imagine. This is the best I can imagine. These are some other possibilities I can imagine. And this, I mean, in some way, this comes back to that risk, which is like, and I don't know. And it kind of titrating again, like my capacity to be in the unknown. Here's what I can do. And here's what I don't have control over, which is frankly a lot. And I mean, I almost feel emotional about it because I just think like that's so much this human realm is like how tender it is to live in a world where the truth is like we don't control a lot and we want to control a lot. And it's kind of like we've been sold that that's where safety is it being control rather than, and this is where I do think this links back to energetic range, which is I would say that our, and by safety, I don't mean nothing bad will ever happen or things always go our way, but I would say our true safety comes from our ability to respond in the moment. Because if something happens that I wasn't expecting, like, do I have that kind of fluidity to respond in the moment? Do I have what I need in the moment to like respond? Maybe this is what's called for, or maybe this or that. And the more that I can develop both what we talked about, which is like, oh, I actually comfortable with myself. And the more I can also develop that, like I have ability to respond to many different circumstances, the more that I walk through the world and I'm like, actually, I'm okay. Because I'm going to be okay. Like if something happens I didn't expect, like I'll find a way to respond. Oh, which is what I really wanted to say about worst case scenario.
Okay.
Which is the best experience I ever had around this was when I was very first going to launch this program I lead called Fierce Grace. And I was just terrified. Like I was so excited about the program, but I wasn't talking about it at all. I was like withholding because I was like, oh God, as soon as I say it. And this woman, I was in this program and one of the other women in the program, we got paired up and she basically was like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I realized it was like, again, it was like that amorphous looming in the back, like just bad things. And as soon as she really asked the question, I had to answer. I was like, well, what is the worst that could happen? And the first thought was like, well, no one would sign up. And I was like, well, that's not that bad. Like, that's what's happening right now because I'm not talking about it. And I'm living that. So, and then I thought, oh, what's the worst that could happen is like, I mean, maybe I went through a couple other steps, but I hit this point where I thought, oh, it's that I would run the program and people would think it was bad. Yeah. Somehow it was bad. And and I was like, oh. And then I realized that wasn't even the worst. The worst was that they'd be like, it was okay. And I was like, oh God.
Yeah, you found it.
And then what I realized, and this comes to the responsiveness, is I was like, oh, I would deal with that. Like, it's actually not possible that I could lead an entire 6-month program and not know until the very end that people thought, meh, it's all right. And then I wouldn't find some way to be responsive to like making it right. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm just afraid, yeah, I'm still afraid to have conversations. And I'm so, I'm just afraid I'm doing something new. But I trust myself to meet what I think is the worst case scenario. So sometimes it's not even, I think, yes, we can go, I'm holding worst case. And can I look also at best case? Like, what is it actually to think positive? And sometimes it's helpful to actually just get clear about like, what is this boogeyman worst case that's in the closet that I've never even named? Yeah.
I love that. And telling the truth about it. That's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like we convince ourselves of very interesting things to go through life, and telling the truth has been a really important, simple, not easy. Even just what
Yes.
you're saying about giving a hug or affection, or the boyfriend example you gave of somebody running up and like hugging them. It's like telling the truth that like, oh, what happens if they don't receive me? Well, like you deal with it in the moment. You
Yeah.
don't like, because you try to come up with all these like solutions for problems that don't exist yet. And
Exactly. Yeah.
keeps you really busy up here. So, yeah, really speaking to some of my experiences today.
Yeah.
So I love where this is gone, and maybe something that I would love to chat about to close out is, and for the audience, we're recording this in December, but this conversation is always relevant, uh about needing things now and the holidays, and needing it, it doesn't even have to be gift giving, but needing an answer now, needing a
Mhm.
something, and just how to sort of be okay with not having
Mhm.
more growth, more, I don't know, friends, more something, just the being satisfied, like how to be satisfied
Mhm.
and not need this instant gratification, instant delivery, instant thing to be okay. Because sometimes maybe we gravitate toward, if I get the thing, then I'm okay. Because we've talked about an uncertainty a
Mhm.
lot and safety this conversation. So maybe we can kind of wrap it up in that area.
Yeah. I mean, I love all the different layers of that you're
Yeah.
bringing. And in a way, I do think this touches on something you mentioned before where we didn't go, which was kind of about like seasons and
Ooh,
cycles.
yeah.
And we are in December, but even January was,
Yeah.
in the northern hemisphere anyway,
Yeah.
is going to be mostly
Yeah.
cold and dark. And,
Yeah.
my garden is like,
Yeah. No life there.
it's not
Yeah.
real pretty right now. And so I think there's both. What I loved was you said like how to be fulfilled, like actually to stay with fulfillment rather than needing more. And I think there's these things are almost like sisters. They're not quite
Yeah.
exactly the same, but there's the fulfillment, and then there's also just being with like not feeling great or it being fallow
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And and there is, I mean, I just think that is probably one of the deepest practices, right? Is like, I don't feel okay, and that's okay. I'm not super happy, and that's like, it doesn't mean that there's a problem. What if this feeling low or sad, or just like, what if this doesn't mean anything's wrong? And again, it's very different than like, maybe I should just, woe is me, just give up, and this is as good as it gets, and I should settle or put up with things that are not okay. It's not really the same as more just going like, okay. I mean, it's a little like looking around the space, right? Kind of looking at my life, not to convince myself that I should feel better, but going like, actually, my children are well. My partnership is good. My home is good. It's okay that my garden is dead. It's the right time. I have enough money, like kind of go like,
Right.
actually, things are well, and I just feel low. Okay. That's what's so, and can I not try to change this experience? Which leads to what you said, which again is like, well, maybe if I bought this program, it would change
Yeah.
my experience. Or
Yeah.
maybe if I bought myself a gift, or maybe if I
Yeah.
bought my partner a gift, or maybe if, like the kids have more things, or
Yeah.
and I think that really is, I think even those of us who don't think of ourselves as super tapped into consumer culture, like we just are. Um, and so the pause that we talked about earlier, I think is really helpful. Just like, okay, so I want like a zing, and can I make my zing a little more subtle, right? Can I make my zing like reading a book, or can I make my zing browsing at the local bookstore rather than like buying a shit ton on Amazon? Or can I make it, and I think most people can relate. And again, this is a place of just honesty, not blame, shame, or judgment.
Yeah.
We can relate to like purchasing something and being like, ooh, this is going to be great. And then literally not even caring when it arrives. Like, not only did it not fill the void, it wasn't even that exciting. It was like it arrived and it was like, okay, like what next?
I did that this year with the library. I got a library card. And the first time I went bananas. I don't know how many books I got, but it also, when you check out, it tells you how much money you saved. It's like, you saved this much money by not buying this.
That's amazing.
And so it was like even more incentivizing. But what I noticed after the first time, I read a few of the books for sure.
Yeah.
But when I kept going back, I noticed I'd get all the books and then I wouldn't read them. Like I didn't even have time to read the amount of books that I rented. It was like, but it was in real time kind of noticing that would have been an Amazon purchase before. It would have been the like, okay, this book looks cool. Somebody recommended it. Ship, it's going to get here tomorrow. And so I'm so glad this is a little experiment as we talk about these experiments that we can do to kind of see like, it was so cool. And I love the library and I love the gift that we can go and get books. But I also was noticing where I was like, why was I getting 7? Like, I don't need 7.
Right. I need to read one book and then go read another book.
Yeah.
But it's so, I mean, again, finding ways this is kind of beautiful because again, it's almost like the titration we talked about. It's like finding ways to be engaged in that can, I mean, maybe it is on the larger scale, move us away from consumerism.
Yeah.
But even on that subtle scale, to just like practice in a realm that doesn't necessarily like get everything.
Right.
But titrating, right? So the library or things in that, I love that in that realm. And then being like, how many of these did I read? I remember last year around this time, I was working with a client and we were laughing about, how often someone will recommend a book and you'll be, and like our go-to response now is like, oh, I'll put it on the list
immediately.
And what it would be like to just say like, that sounds amazing. I'm never going to read it. Like,
that should be the answer for me for sure, for a few of them.
At least, and how often that's true. It can be true about TV shows, it can be true about movies, it can be true about
true.
That's so true. Like there's a lot of things, and that there's sort of this idea that we should have this endless list of things that at some point we will get to. The podcasts now.
And the shows too. Like you're saying, when people are like, what should I watch next? It's like, I don't know. You're like, go outside. Stop watching.
And to be willing, and there's almost, I mean, it's weird because even with a show, it can be this embarrassment. If somebody says, oh my God, this thing is so good. If you were just like, that's amazing, I'm never going to watch it. Like I would just rarely say that to somebody. Be like, I trust your recommendation. I'm sure it's really good. Thank you for the recommendation. I'm not going to read that book.
I think they'd be taken aback probably. Well, some would be like, I love your honesty. And some people would probably be like, what?
Yeah. Well, and most of the time, I mean, sometimes people are genuinely recommending.
Totally.
But a lot of times they're just saying something that they did. And then we go like, I'll put it on the list rather than like, wow, tell me more, or that sounds really interesting. Or how'd you read that? Or, so I don't want to lose that piece that you brought in around fulfillment, because I actually think it's really important. It's like this, again, it feels like a sister topic because it often tugs on something very similar, but in a different way. Which is, people often are they want to work with like, how do I work with this longing that I have? Basically, this void, this longing can be about intimate relationship, it can be all these different things. And that often is sitting with like, what if I just feel this way? And it doesn't actually mean that I need anything, that anything's wrong. But I find that interestingly, people are afraid of feeling fulfilled. And again, I don't know like how intrinsic this is to the human condition or how kind of current culture it is. I'm going to say for right now, it's irrelevant to the conversation,
Okay.
and just say I see it a lot, which is that people are actually afraid of feeling fulfilled because then we are afraid we will never do anything ever again.
Mm.
Like I mean, with the no man diet, the way it comes up is I will have women literally say, I'm afraid that I'll be okay without a partner. Like, I'm afraid to do the program because I might actually feel okay without a partner. And I'm like, can you hear yourself?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we also then tend to think if I genuinely feel okay without a partner, that means I will not have a partner, or I can't have a partner, or I'll never relate to people. Like I'll never want to have sex again or something like
Yeah. Right.
other than what if I just genuinely feel okay and I could also be interested in people?
Yeah.
What if I genuinely if I not bypass and lie about what maybe doesn't work for me in my life, but like if I really sit in satisfaction around my life, this fear of like, but what if then I don't make more money, or what if I never create a new program, or what if I'm just like a lazy lump on the couch and I don't do anything because I'm fulfilled? I think that's the fear, rather than find like what might we create from. It feels like it's like deep-seated fulfillment. It's almost like it's connected to belonging. Like what might we fulfill, what might we create, or how might we live our lives if we were actually satisfied and there was still life to be lived. And so I guess I would just say to anyone listening, like, to notice. Like, again, it's not about lying, if you're like, but I'm not really satisfied with, such and such. Like, don't lie to yourself, but to notice the places, and again, sometimes it can just be telling the truth to ourselves about moments that are deeply fulfilling. Like, oh, right now, I mean, I have these moments sometimes where like I'll look at I'll watch my kids doing something, or like my partner will be out at the beach and I'll just be like, oh, like this moment is actually, it's absolutely full.
Yeah.
And can I take some pause to actually breathe that in and just go like, this right now, we're not going to stay here forever, but like this is as good as it gets. This really is. And I guess what I want to say is, if people hearing this, like if you do have that moment and you feel that, and then you feel that little tug that goes like,
Yeah.
I think that's common these days.
Right.
I think it's kind of like a stress response,
Okay.
and that there's something that we've been trained that like that it would be scary to be fulfilled. It's like the culture wants to pull on us and go like, you're not going to be a functioning member of society, or
Right.
you're not going to buy anything from this place.
Yeah. Yeah. I I so I so resonate with that, and remember there was a talk that I sat through at some point in the last year or two, and it was something similar. It was like when you have a moment of just feeling like the joy or the happiness, yeah, to stop and be like, in this moment, like I am full, I am joyful, I am happy. And it's so cool to actually experience one of those moments and actually name it,
Yeah.
because I think naming it, kind of to go for full circle with this conversation, can help create that safety, can help create
Mm-hmm.
that moment of, inner stability and security and inner okayness. And then, as you mentioned, that little voice that comes after, to be able to be like, oh, wait, like I caught you, like the voice that kind of tries to stop the moment, um, is also important, because it just shows how much self-awareness you've cultivated.
Yes. I mean, I do want to, and then, I mean, this is probably a great place to,
Yeah.
to leave people, is like, to just remember that every moment of self-awareness is a moment to celebrate. So
Yes.
even if what it is noticing, oh, look, I was taking myself out of my fulfillment, rather than like, why did you do that? No, 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 no. And going and just not be like, oh, look, I noticed.
Yeah.
And because I noticed, I can actually bring my attention back to my satisfaction.
Mhm.
And so, and then I did just want to say, on a really practical level,
Yeah.
I mean, this is why in every single program I run, I have some sort of reflection process that has people reflect on the positive, because we're less trained to do that. So we're much more trained to see, what isn't the way I want it in this moment, or how much farther do I have to go? Or, people will say like, well, I only did that practice 3 times this week, rather than like, I did that practice 3 times this week. So I think that one of the ways we can start to train ourselves to notice those moments is, again, whether it's daily or weekly. Probably weekly is about as long as it should go, because then we'll just forget. So I do highly recommend, but even if it's just a simple thing of like, what am I proud of? What went well? What made me smile this past week? What is something that I handled really well? And again, none of this is to ignore the things that we might not be happy about, but simply to take some of that attention and put it on, what am I proud of? What did I do really well? What went better than I expected?
That's a really good place to close and to invite the audience listening to, whenever they are listening to this, to maybe do that practice the day or week that you listen to this while it's fresh in the mind. Because I agree, we definitely skew toward the what went wrong, what was the problem, what was the this, and not like just giving yourself credit. Giving yourself credit is the validation is huge. And as you mentioned, not to bypass the
and then I think it actually gives us a pathway, because if we go, this is what went well, like, great, it's actually, rather than showing me where I don't want to go, it's actually showing me the pathway of where I want to go more often.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories and your wisdom. And I so appreciate it. And I know the audience will appreciate the conversation as well.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you learned something new and embrace being the student of your own life until the time we meet again. If you'd like a way to support the show and to hear more of this content, it means so much to me for you to take a few minutes out of your day to leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to stay connected with you on Instagram or TikTok at Adriana Goes Creative. You can find me and hit follow while you're feeling inspired right after listening to the show. I can't wait to get a DM from you hearing what you loved about it and what you desire to hear more of. I appreciate each and every one of you so much. I'll talk to you soon. This podcast is for entertainment and general informational purposes only. I am not a licensed healthcare professional, and this podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician or other qualified professional.